In this video, we are going to implement login functionality in our application. In the previous video, we deployed our application to Heroku, and this is what we have. We have a live API that we have created. So if you want to have a view, something like this, Chrome extension are installed. So if you want to do that, so go to More Tools and Extensions, and let me show you the extension I installed called JSON Handle. This one. Alright, so I have something, a nice presentation as this. So let's go ahead and implement the login functionality in our application. So how the login is going to work. Remember, the login works in this way. We are going to compare what the user is typing in. Okay, if you look at this one, let's log out. We are going to compare what the user is typing in exactly and the password. But the most complicated part is that it's very easy if we are not hashing the password. But in this case, we are hashing the password inside our DB. So if you look at the response coming back, how can you remember all these passwords? Yeah, so because of that, we need to tell Bcrypt, the one we use to hash this password, to what? To decrypt again and give us back the one we entered. So let's go back to our model, and then we're going to implement that functionality so that Bcrypt is going to take this hash token and compare the one that we are entering, whether it matches or it was the same which was used to hash this user password field. So let's go ahead and then do that. Cool. So let's head over to our Server file folder, SRC, and inside here we have what is called the user. So here we are going to add additional middleware, okay, attached to this one to verify the user, because on the model, any function we apply to that, we have access to it inside our controllers. So this time around, we are going to add our own method to our model, user model. So let's call this one verify password. Okay, verify password. And this is how we're going to do. On the user schema, and some around is .methods. If you want to add your own methods to it, it's called .methods. It's plural. And then the function you want to add. So let's call this one is password match or valid. Okay, it's password match. It looks more sense. So this is a function called is password match. So on all the instance of our users, we have is password match, right? So this function, I'm going to use a normal function, but instead, because I want to avoid callback error, I'm going to use mark my function as an async. Cool. So here we are going to return true or false using Bcrypt. Remember? So here let's return the function here, and here we are going to await Bcrypt. Okay, Bcrypt, we have another method on it called compare. So what are you going to compare? Remember, we are going to compare what the user is entering. If you look at this one, we are going to compare what the user is entering. So this function is going to receive the incoming password. Sorry, this one, incoming password. So because of that, let's add what you are receiving from the front end called password, or entered password, to be more precise, called entered password. Okay, so now it looks like this. So we're going to compare what the user is typing in. So entered password, like that. All right, and then I'm going to compare to what is inside the DB, and be accessible on this .password. Remember, when we're hashing the user password, if you console log this, it represents the instance of the user, right? So we're going to compare that with this .password. All right, and that is it. That's all what we need. So on the instance of users inside a controller, we have this function or method. So let's go to controller. They're going to add one more controller called login, right? Login. So comment like login. Okay, so const bigger for you to see. Cons login user controller, right, is equal to what? Arrow function. It takes rex and response like that. But because we want to handle errors, let's make use of the express async handler package we installed. So we are going to wrap that function inside that. So let's cut this one and make use of express async handler, and then let's paste our function as that. So let's mark this one as an async to use await inside it. There we go. So inside the function body here, we're going to make use of try and catch, right? Make use of try and catch if something goes on well or not, or better still, let's ignore that. So here, first of all, let's grab what the user is typing, because if you look at this one, we are receiving the email and the password. So let's get this one from the request object. So let's destructure that. So cons is equal to reg the body, and if there's reg, this optional chaining to avoid using AND operator. So I'll receive email and the password from the body. Okay, cool. So then we're going to check if the user is found. We're going to find the user by the email, right, and the password. So first of all, let's find the user. But before that, let's try to test this endpoint to see whether it's perfect. So let's just send this text called login. So let's export this one, this controller to login user controller, and then let's go to our route here, users and users route. So let's require that controller here called login user controller, and then because it's going to be a post request, we're going to make use of this. So copy this one and paste here and change this one to login, and then let's run our login controller like that. Cool. So now our endpoint going to be API user /login. So let's go to Postman, and then let's add one more endpoint. So let's copy this one, the register one, and then let's change this one to login. And then here the endpoint is API users /login. So let's try it out if it's gonna work. Try it out, and there you go, we have login. Cool. So now we have our routes being working perfectly. So let's go ahead and implement the logic. So first, let's have some steps here. First, find the user in DB. Okay, so we can find the user by what? The email. So cons user found is equal to, let's use await because we talk to MongoDB, and then on the user we have a method called find1. So find1 returns the instance of one query, right, at a time. So find1, we're going to find the user by email, right? So here, if you try to return the user found, so let's go back to Postman and try and find this user by email. So here, inside the body here, we're going to find the user by email. So I have it being here. As you can see, I'm finding this user by email. Cool. So let's try to send this request and see this user is not found. It means this user is not in our DB, right? So let's try to register, let's say this user, send, and this user has been registered. So now let's find this user, login, and then let's find. There we go. It means that the user is found here. Alright, cool. So next is what we're gonna do is, now that we found the, make it smaller. Now that we found the user, what's the next step? So come back to code. So now if the user is found, then we have to compare the password to. Remember, on the user found, we have a method called a password match. What is the method on the schema, on the model? So here, let's go ahead and then, first of all, let's comment here and say check if the user password match. Okay, so here, if, and remember the is password match returns true or false, right? So first of all, let's check for first if user found, okay? And remember, we have the AND operator here, so two conditions. So if user found, okay, and on the user found, remember we have a method called is password match. So let's go back to our model again and make sure we type exactly the same thing. Because of that, I'm going to copy that. Okay, and remember, this function returns true or false, and this function takes what? The password we are entering. Remember, inside user schema, we are passing in the password field here. So inside here, let's pass in this password, right? Because this function receives a password field. Cool. And remember, this function is a promise, right? Because here, anytime you are returning a promise from a function, you need to await it. That from JavaScript, right? So you need to await that. So let's await this function. Await. Okay, save it. And then the last thing is, if this one going to return true or false. So if this one return true or false, then let's return something and say that rest.json, let's call this one user found. Okay, something like user found. Otherwise, let's say user not found. So let's try again. So inside the postman, let's try. We see we have illegal argument undefined of a string. Alright, so we need to pass in the password field. So here, let's pass in the password. Remember here, password, and then let's type in something like it doesn't exist yet. So let's try it out. We see we have user not found because this password doesn't exist. This password doesn't match the one we are trying to enter. So let's provide 1 2 3 4 5 and then send user found. Did we see that? So now that we see that we have seen the user being found here, we can return a token. But for now, let's return some data of the user to the client or in the front end. The front end, when you log in, we need to save your details inside our local storage. So if you look at the final one, if I log in here and I go to my local storage, I have instance of the user, for example, email, password, and the profile photo inside that. So we need to return something to the user that, hey user, this is what, hey client, this is what, these are your details when you log in from this application. So here, let's return. For the meantime, let's return some data. First of all, I want to return the ID, and the ID is from where? User found dot underscore ID. That's from MongoDB. And then next one, let's return first name, right? Also from user found dot first name. So let's return last name, also from user found last name. And then email, let's return the email, user found email. Alright, and then let's return is admin, because on the front end we will determine if you're admin, then we can show you a certain component, right? So like this one, for example, because I'm admin, I can check for the dashboard. But if I log in as a normal user, I'll not be able to access what the dashboard. That's why I'm returning is an admin to make some conditionals in the front end. Alright, so if user does not found here, we can throw an error, right? So here, let's return some status code, rest.status, and say that 401, right? That's unauthorized. So we carry 401, and then we can throw our own custom error, throw new error, and we can say that invalid login credentials. Don't be narrow, meaning that don't tell you, okay, now your password is matched but email is not correct. Don't give the user search details. Okay, so with this, if you look at the final one, you see that you're not an admin, right? That's what I was telling you about. So if I've tried to log in with something that doesn't exist, you can see that I'm going to receive some message called invalid login credential. This is from back end, and this is what we are sending it here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try the endpoint again. So this is my endpoint, right? So let me send again. There we go, I have it. But if I provide wrong password field, let's see something like this one, and then send, you can see that invalid login credentials. All right, cool. So now our login is working, but we are not done yet, because we need to tell our server that this user has login, and that is what we call authorization. So we have authentication and authorization. Authentication is allowing the user to be able to log into our application, and that's what we did it here. Okay, the user is able to log in. So authorization means that now that the user has logged in, how can we authorize a user to access a certain point? But because of that, we need to tell our server that this person has logged in. And unlucky for us, HTTP servers are stateless. So we need to find a way to preserve, tell the server that this user has logged in and keep track of his actions in our application. So because of that, we're going to use what is called JSON Web Token to do that. So we're going to use what is called token-based authorization, and because of that, we're going to use a package called JSON Web Token, which is a popular tool for creating tokens. So let's go to Google and search for JSON Web Token. All right, and let's see how it's been implemented. All right, cool. So we have JSON Web Token here, and as you can see, JSON Web Token are an open industry standard RFC, something like that. So all what it's doing is it's going to generate a token to a particular user, and we can decode this code and get back the user. So as you can see here, we have the algorithm token here, right? The type called HS256, that is standard way, and then the payload, right? The payload is what, after we decoded this user, we got this. So you're going to use an ID to create a token, and when you decode this token, we have access to the user. So that's all what it's doing here. So let's go to our terminal, shut down the server like that, and then let's install. Make sure that you are in your server, right? Server folder. So yarn add JSON Web Token like that, and hit enter. All right, so JSON Web Token is successfully installed. So let's restart the server, yarn watch. Okay, so in the terminal I saw some error, so let's try to send this request again and see the kind of error we have. Okay, we've seen the, let me make it bigger here. So let's go back our terminal. You see we have this nice error that cannot set headers after they are set to the client. So it means that inside our found, right, we are returning two things to the user, right? So if user found, then or else, put this one into else statement, right? And then let's put it here. So let's try again. Let's restart the server again. Let me clear the console. This is not part of the JSON Web Token implementation, just to fix that nasty error. Alright, so it's connected. Let's try again and send the request. Let's check. Okay, that is it. The error is gone. So let's go ahead and implement our token using JSON Web Token. Alright, so all what we need, the whole logic here is that we want a particular property of the user that is going to sign this token, right? So here we can generate or create a function to take this user ID and give it to JSON Web Token to create a token for us. And that token created represents this instance of this user. But because I always want to keep my business logic inside my controller, I'm going to create a middleware that will generate that token and I'll assign into this login user. So let's go to our middlewares right here. So let me close these ones to have more rooms to work with. So under server, SRC and middleware. So here we have one is called token. Let's call this one generate token. I like using this variable name .js. And this middleware is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to take the ID of the user, right? So let's require the packet called JWT is equal to required JSON Web Token, but not JWT as that. So JSON Web Token. That's the first step. The second step is that let's create a function. So const generate token, right? And this one gonna take the ID of the user, right? And that is all. So here we're going to return the token, right? So here let's bring in the JWT dot sign. I want to sign this token with the user ID. So here let's provide the ID. That's the first configuration. So next configuration is the payload, right? The key. So let's you can provide a key that represents when you're signing this token. So let's try to put this one in its own environment variable because the keys, right? So here for the keys here, let's add this key inside our environment variable. So let's call this one JWT key. And it's gonna be some random numbers. Okay, so now remember the JWT key. So let's come here and then let's have access to the process.env dot JWT key, and that is it. Okay, so let's remove this key because we are testing it here. Okay, so that is it. That's all what we need. And then next, so this function takes three things. One, the ID you want to use to generate this token, and the key and some configuration. This configuration tells you when should this token expire, because something expires in. And let's give this one, let's say 30 days, right, to expire. So it will be 30D. 10 days going to be 10D. So let's export this function called generate token. So now that we have the token being generated, how can we call this function? Call this function when the user is logging. So here let's come to controllers, users controllers here, and let's require that function called generate token here. Oh, I have the auto import. Perfect. You see that is up here. Okay, so let's head over to login component, so a controller, and here you can call the function here. So let's add one property and assign to that and call this one generate token, and this takes what? An ID of the user. So here when user is found, we have the ID here. So we're going to be user found dot underscore ID. That is it. So let's go back to Postman and then let's log in. And you log in successfully, we are going to see additional field called token. So let's try it out. And there we go. Did you see how it is? We got it done. Token generated. So now our login functionality is working as we're expecting. So now that we have this in our application, if you want to protect any route, we need to make sure that this token is being sent as part of the header when the user is making the request. So here ends the video for user login.